A lot has happened in the past few days in Afghanistan as the US decided to withdraw its forces, and the deadline for its withdrawal should be in September 2021. However, the pictures and the videos that are coming from Afghanistan, the least to say, are horrendous. And we can see the scenes in the airport of Kabul and how the civilians and some of the collaborators with the American occupation forces are trying to flee, and the US is pushing them away. And some of them even fell from, like, they were holding the tires of the evacuation plane, and they fell from the sky. I mean, I owe, like, my sympathy to the American occupation is below zero. But at the same time, my sympathy to Taliban fighters and their ideology is also below zero. So I have no sympathy to any of these sides now. But in order to understand the situation in Afghanistan in a better way, we need to put this conflict into a proper context, because when you watch the media nowadays, they start the events as if it only happened in 2001 when United States invaded Afghanistan. However, it's more complicated than that, and it goes back at least 2 decades before 2001, meaning before 9/11. So in the late 70s, when Soviet Union was occupying Afghanistan, the United States had a brilliant idea, according to Hillary Clinton, which is to spread, first of all, an ideology, Saudi Arabia's ideology, which is Wahhabism, which is the most radical interpretation of the Sharia, and also it has its special, not only interpretations, but also special hadiths that the Wahhabis believe in, and they are truly bloody and radical. And a lot of terrorist organizations rely on this ideology and these books in order to justify their terrorism. So the United States has spreaded this ideology. Yes, I'm telling you the truth. The United States tasked Saudi Arabia to build tens of madrasas. Madrasas in Arabic means schools, and these schools were teaching or indoctrinating the students and the pupils with the Wahhabi ideology. And most of these schools were built in Pakistan and also in many other countries in the Middle East. So the goal of this was in order to form an army of mujahideen against the Soviet Union and urge them to fight against the Soviet Union. So starting from 79 till 1990, the US supported this mujahideen. So not only through this ideological indoctrination that Saudi Arabia was doing, but also by funding, by sending them weaponry. And this so-called Arab mujahideen, which came from all around the world, they, like similar to Syria, they all started to travel to Afghanistan in order to fight against the Soviet Union. And in 1990 or in 1989, it was a disastrous moment for the Soviet Union, and Soviet Union withdrew, and then the Soviet Union collapsed. So it was a success story for the United States by using these radical jihadists against the Soviet Union, and they copied the same tactic, or the same, of course, strategy. It's not even a tactic in Syria, but they failed. So when the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan in 1990, Taliban, which didn't exist in this previous phase or era, but they were being pumped up and prepared in Pakistan, because as I mentioned, Saudi Arabia was building these madrasas, and these madrasas, the schools, were teaching the students to become radicals. They were radicalizing the people, right? So Taliban was formed in northern Pakistan, and they started to advance from northern Pakistan into the Afghani territories, and they expanded into the Afghani territories between 1990 and 1995. And in 1995, they removed Burhanuddin Rabbani, which was the leader of Afghanistan, and who was one of the main godfathers and of the Arab Mujahideen army in Afghanistan. So both sides were really radical, and they had political differences between them, between Taliban and the leader of the Arab Mujahideen, similar to the infighting between ISIS and al-Nusra. They share the ideology, but they differ in politics and who will control what area and what natural resources they will control, right? In 1998, Taliban controlled around 90% of Afghanistan, so it was basically in control of the entire country. And Taliban's control or occupation of Afghanistan was somehow welcomed by the Afghani people. Not because they liked Taliban, but because their experience with the previous regime led by Burhanuddin Rabbani was very negative. And Burhanuddin Rabbani was himself very radical, and his government was very radical. They were imposing harsh Sharia laws, as I mentioned, the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. Over the population, there was lawlessness, a lot of chaos was going on in Afghanistan. So the people were welcoming the Taliban. Maybe the Taliban would be different. And at the beginning, Taliban, at the first few years, they were somehow different. At least they imposed rule and law, right? Or let's say order in Afghanistan. However, they changed very fast in their practices against the Afghani people. They resorted to the Wahhabi Sharia courts. They banned TVs. They banned female over 10 years old to go to schools. They banned music, cinema. And if you remember, in 2001, the Taliban destroyed the Buddha statues in Afghanistan. And in my memory, this is the first thing that I remember about Afghanistan when I was 14. So when I started to be more or less interested in politics, I remember the scenes coming from Afghanistan and how Taliban detonated these Buddha statues. And since then, I was very interested also to know about Buddhism. And during the university days, we studied also about Buddhism. But that images that I still remember, and so Taliban cannot be in my memory any moderate force, right? It is a radical force, and I still have that perception about Taliban, that it is a radical force. However, I also want to mention this just as a side note. I also remember that it was Al Jazeera, Qatar's Al Jazeera, which was accompanying Taliban and taking exclusive photos, exclusive interviews, and exclusive videos of this when they detonated the Buddha statues, and later also with Osama bin Laden. I mean, it was Al Jazeera which was accompanying Osama bin Laden all the time, right? Anyways, so between this time that I mentioned, between 1998 when they controlled 90% of Afghanistan, they started to give safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists. So Al-Qaeda terrorists started to have their headquarters in Afghanistan, their operations room, and they want to expand from Afghanistan into the neighboring countries. And later they allegedly conducted the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States. And from that point, United States accused Osama bin Laden of conducting these terrorist attacks, and he was residing in Afghanistan, and the United States went after, supposedly or allegedly, against Osama bin Laden. And in Afghanistan, they invaded the country, they occupied it, they said they will bring democracy, they will bring human rights, so they will change the system and But what happened during this era? Between 2001 and 2021, now it's 20 years. Democracy has failed. The Afghani army, which consists of 300,000 soldiers, are collapsed, basically. Now we can see a few thousand Talibani soldiers can spread panic among the Afghani army, and they just handed over their weapons and they are escaping the country. And you can see in a few days, Taliban has occupied Kabul, whereas the Joe Biden, the president of the United States, said it will take around 6 months. So maybe it took 6 days, the least to say. In 2013, this is an important point that we need to mention. Taliban opened an office in Qatar. So just see these links. Al Jazeera, the Qatar Al Jazeera was accompanying Taliban. It had a direct contact with Osama bin Laden. And then Taliban opened a representation office in Qatar, in Doha. And between 2018 and 2020, there were peace talks between the United States and Taliban in Qatar, which is a strategic ally for the United States, and they struck the deal in 2020, and the deal says it basically paves the way for the American withdrawal, and Taliban was not to allow Al-Qaeda fighters to have a safe haven again in Afghanistan, and maybe, of course, other strategic partnerships between both sides. A lot of things that we don't know that are still under the table. And Taliban also vowed not to target people who oppose Taliban, basically, but the experiences underground says that even after the peace deal, Taliban has launched an assassination campaigns against journalists, judges, activists, women in power. So they have not changed. They still they're still radicals, and they still follow their radical ideology, and it's very difficult to change such an ideology, neither by force nor by indoctrination. Again, it's a really difficult task now after 40 years of indoctrination through these madrasas, through spreading this terrorism. And the United States liked the idea of this mujahideen, of using them against the governments that it dislikes. And Washington used it against Syria, used it against Libya, right, after the Arab Spring. Now, 85,000, we have in Afghanistan 85,000 Taliban fighters against 300,000 Afghani soldiers, which I mentioned, they are basically useless. The Kabul is basically more or less occupied by Taliban. The president of Afghanistan, Ghani, he fled, I think, to Turkmenistan or something, or Tajikistan. There is no counterterrorism policy adopted in Afghanistan. The proof of that is now what we are seeing, of the chaos and the radical elements are expanding again. It seems that the United States was in Afghanistan not to fight Al-Qaeda and Taliban. It seems to me that way. It seems that the United States has established or re-established again the opium trade in Afghanistan. It started from 0%, now it's skyrocketing. But there are a few lessons that we need to learn from Afghanistan example, right? First of all, the United States never invades any country to spread democracy and human rights. People who believe in this are either really not smart or they are collaborators with the CIA, period. The United States was there to block China's access to Central Asia and to be pain in the ass for Russia on the southern borders of Russia in order to revive the opium market and other strategic interests for the United States. And for the collaborators with the American army, their fate, as you can see, some of them maybe escaped with the American forces, but the most of them stayed in Afghanistan. They were forced to stay by the American forces. Some of them were even shot by the American forces in Kabul airport. Some of them were trying to catch the wheels or the tires, of the American evacuation plane, and they fell from the sky. If you want to watch these pictures or videos, you can go to my Twitter account, my personal account, Kevork Almasian. I'm not going to post it on YouTube. And from this exact point, about the collaborators, I really want to send a message to the collaborators with the American forces in Syria, whether it is the so-called Free Syrian Army or the separatists among the Kurds in the eastern shores of the Euphrates. This could be also your fate. And I am very confident that if the United States withdraws from Syria, and it will withdraw from Syria in the next 1 or 2 years, they could face similar fate, despite the fact that the Syrian army would never seek revenge against them. But because they don't own that territory and they know that they are seeking refuge among the American forces, they will flee, just like the president of Afghanistan, Ghani, fled the country because he doesn't care about Afghanistan and he doesn't want to defend Afghanistan against the Taliban. And ironic enough, this president of Afghanistan, he published a study in 2012. I think the title of it is Preparing for Syria's Transition. And he is discussing the period after the political transition after Assad. And after 9 years of his research, he fled and Assad stayed. And if we want to learn a lesson from it, those who own the territory and believe in their people and their brave leader, they will defend their country. So I will end up this video by a question to you. I want to keep it open-ended because personally, I really don't know what's going to happen in Afghanistan. I'm reading a lot of analysis. But in your opinion, do you think the withdrawal of the US forces from Afghanistan is a preparation for a chaos in Central Asia and for this chaos to spread to the borders with China and to the borders with Russia and to destabilize Central Asia in order to block the Chinese Silk Road and to block the Russian influence in that area? Or do you think that Russia and China will be able to contain Taliban? And as we can see, both countries are seeking relations with Taliban, and there are even meetings between the representatives of both sides. Do you think that this is in the interest of Russia and China or other growing powers like India, or it is a plot by the US to create what is called the constructive chaos that they pursued in the Middle East and North Africa, and now they're trying to do the same in Central Asia? Let me know your opinion, please, in the comments below. I really want to read your comments. I read all the comments, and this is something that I also want to know because personally, I cannot foresee which scenario is more plausible. So let's see and let's wait and see. This was all for today. I hope you enjoyed it, guys. If you're new, please consider subscribing. Even if you think that you're subscribed, please check. It really helps me. And if you want to support my independent commentary work on YouTube, you can become a patron. The link in the description below. And for those who are sending me donations, whether through Patreon or PayPal, I'm really, really grateful and I thank you all. But please be careful. Do not write, when you send me a donation through PayPal, do not write in the notes anything related to Syria. When you say, for example, thank you for everything you do for Syria, or you're a Syrian, anything like this, the transaction is being blocked by PayPal because of the American sanctions against Syria and the Syrian people. See you next time.